What's up guys, Houndish here, and today we're jumping in with one of the most significant This Week at Bungie updates I think we've ever seen, and Bungie give us a ton of information about changes that we're going to see for weapons in Season 17. And so we're going to break everything down in this video. Bungie include changes that they're going to make for Airborn gunplay, as well as adjustments to Flinch. Plus they'll be making changes to special weapons, especially shotguns and fusion rifles. They're also going to be buffing glaives, including buffs for the exotic glaives. And then they talk about a series of different archetype changes, updates to weapon drops, perk adjustments, and a ton of other stuff which we'll round up in the video. So a lot to speak about today guys, and I hope you find this one useful. And jumping straight in, Bungie say we've noticed that several aspects of how glaives interact with weapon and armor perks don't match player expectations. And so they speak about changes for Season 17, and they say the intent is that glaive melees should activate perks that trigger off base melee damage or kills. For example, ammo refill from Grave Robber, weapon damage buffs ×5 stacks on Swashbuckler, ammo refills from Sealed Hamkara Grasps, but also that glaive melee should not activate perks that trigger off powered melee damage or kills, or require expending subclass melee energy, such as Combination Blow or Assassin's Cowl. They also want glaive melees to benefit from melee damage buffs, such as Winter's Guile and Wormgod Caress. And glaive melee should not benefit from weapon damage buffs such as Rampage, Kill Clip, or Swashbuckler. However, glaive projectile should benefit from those weapon damage buffs. And so some of those are kind of longer term goals, but they say for Season 17 they're pushing glaives deeper into their roles of hard-hitting melee damage and near complete protection when shielded. And they say, note, the Glaive Shield grants 97.5% damage resistance in PvE and 75% in PvP. And for Season 17, they've increased melee damage versus PvE enemies, except for bosses and vehicles, by 25%. They're also reducing the energy drain speed while shielded by 30%, and they've increased the projectile speed dependent on the range stat. So at 0 stat, it's increased from 30 to 60, and at 100, increased from 80 to 100. So we're going to get more melee damage and generally increased projectile speed, as well as reduced energy drain. And they say that exotic glaives will carry these buffs as well, but then have additional changes. So for the Titan Glaive, Edge of Action, players will now gain a Void Overshield while inside the bubble, and Helm of Saint 14 will also apply to that. For Warlock Glaives, they've increased the speed and acceleration of the healing turret projectiles. And finally for the Hunter Glaive, they've tripled the damage of the wave detonation and increased the number of enemies it can chain to from 4 to 8. And so they sound like positive changes when you put them together with the base glaive changes. And really we'll have to see how they play out in the game, but give us your thoughts down below as to whether you think those adjustments are going to make glaives more enticing. Next though, they speak about Flinch, and they say aim deflection on receiving damage, typically called Flinch, is a common pain point. And so for Season 17, they've rebuilt the stability weapon stat to grant Flinch resistance in addition to its other effects, with a maximum Flinch resistance of 10% to 25% depending on weapon archetype. And so that's going to allow players to build for Flinch resistance, depending on preference and the weapon type. So that's pretty cool. Going for higher stability weapons is going to broadly reduce that flinch. They also talk about airborne gunplay, and they say they've added a new weapon stat called Airborn Effectiveness, which is present on all weapons, with the exception of things like swords, and it maps onto aspects of airborne gunplay. And they go on to say that this stat has been hand-tuned on exotic weapons and everything that's shipped in Season 16 or 17, and everything that's ever shipped as Trials or Nightfall loot. And they also point out that this will be a hidden stat at the launch of Season 17, similar to aim assist and recoil direction, but players will be able to check on the specific weapon stat through the API, and in Season 18, several previously hidden stats will be visible on the weapon inspection screen. But for airborne gunplay in general, they say, overall this means you'll get fewer misses due to randomness from the accuracy cone of weapons while airborne, but reliance on aiming is much higher at a low stat, and so to make this easier you'll need to build into airborne, but with decent aim you will land more body shots instead of crits. And so initially we will have to kind of look at that airborne stat via the API, but they say if you want a good airborne effectiveness, say a 70 stat, you should pick a weapon with a high stat roll, then put perks like Icarus on it, and either equip an exotic armor piece that helps, or run a subclass aspect, fragment, or ability if you want to get the best possible airborne effectiveness. And so as always, it will be achieved by various different stats. But they give some examples, things like Frontier's Cry with the precision hand cannon bonus, Icarus Grip, and then Lucky Pants, and that'll result in 79 airborne effectiveness. Submission with Icarus Grip, Stompies, and Tempered Metal would come out at around 12 airborne effectiveness, but then Taraba, with Peacekeepers and Whisper of Hedrons active, we'll be looking at a stat of around 83 airborne effectiveness. So they say it is a big weapon system change and they'll be monitoring how it rolls out. Nonetheless, if you want better performance while airborne, it will be something that you can sort of build into a little bit more with these changes. Next though, they speak about drops for a moment, and for playlist weapons they say they will now have a chance to roll with extra traits in one or both columns, increasing with the number of rank resets for the vendor during a given season. So they say note, reputation resets each season, so you'll need to play these activities each season to unlock the potential for extra perks, but also that all playlist weapons from Beyond Light and later will drop with the appropriate origin trait. So those traits rolling out onto more weapons, and if you're ranking up a lot, more chances to get those additional column perks and ultimately get better rolls. So I think that sounds pretty cool. But next, they speak about one-hit kills and special ammo, and they say there are several damage buffs external to weapons that allow them to one-hit kill without much investment, such as aggressive sniper rifle with high-impact reserves, Ariana's Vow or Le Monarch, specifically when combined with external 20% damage buffs, and they use the example of Empowering Rift. And they say most of these use the same buff under the hood, so we've adjusted them all at once. And moving forward, it will be much rarer to get an easy one-hit kill with a weapon that wouldn't typically allow it. And they've reduced the damage bonus for Empowering Rift, High Energy Fire, and Inertia Override from 20% to 15% against players. But they go on to say that this will have no effect in PvE. On top of that, they want special ammo to be less plentiful in PvP, so they're disabling the ammo scavenger armor mods. And no matter how much ammo a player was carrying on death, if you pick up a special brick, you can only get 1 ammo for a shotgun or sniper, or essentially 1 kill's worth of ammo for weapons that require 1 shot to kill. Additionally, they say they've retuned several special weapon archetypes and exotic weapons, with the general goal of reducing the effectiveness and uptime of special weapons. So there are going to be a few changes there, but they also talk about archetypes. And so they say for special weapons, they've had their in-air accuracy significantly reduced. And so while they're giving us more options to build into primary weapons having better air accuracy, they're reducing it at the same time for special weapons. And so they're going to have a larger airborne accuracy penalty than primary weapons at 0 airborne effectiveness stat. And next they say that sniper rifles are fairly slow to ready, stow, and aim down sights, which has made snapshot feel mandatory for them all. So they're reducing the stow, ready, and aim down sights times by 10%. And so all snipers will be snappier. And there'll also be a change to snapshot they'll touch on in a moment, but sniper rifles will also have less access to ammo than shotguns and fusion rifles, where kills drop ammo right in front of us. And so they say they think ammo scarcity will prevent sniper rifles from spiking. They also say that slug and pellet shotguns are still overwhelmingly popular in PvP, and they're bringing in a change that reduces shotgun one-hit kill distance by around 0.5 meters, so they're reducing the damage fall-off start and end by 1 meter, and they've reduced aim assist and magnetism fall-off start and end by 2 meters. So they are going to feel a bit less strong. Then for fusion rifles, they point out they're very popular at the moment, and they want to reduce the amount of one-hit kills they can do at range, so they've reduced damage fall-off near distance, which will be 2 meters at 0 range and 1.3 meters at 100 range. They're also reducing the damage fall off far distance, so 1 meter at 0 range and 1.3 at 100 range. And then they're reducing the recoil scalar variance between 0 and 100 stability. So 0 stability is unchanged, but at 100 stability we will see an increase in the recoil penalty. But next they talk about trace rifles, and they say besides Divinity, trace rifles aren't as popular in hard content as we want them to be. So they're increasing trace rifle damage against non-red bar combatants by 20%, and they're increasing the ammo picked up per special brick from 18 to 30. That sounds like a positive change. They also say that they want pulse rifles and auto rifles to be more competitive at mid-range, so they're increasing the damage fall-off near distance by 0.75 meters for auto rifles, and they've increased the damage fall-off near distance based on the range stat for pulse rifles. They've also increased the lightweight pulse rifle damage per bullet from 15 to 16, and it's not going to change the time to kill, but it will reduce the number of crits required for a kill. And then they're going to be adjusting zoom on submachine guns, and they say it's too important of a factor. And so for submachine guns in PvP, they're increasing the damage fall-off by 1.5 meters. They're also adjusting zoom values, so for Shiora's Wrath, it's going from 17 to 16. The Multimac with a max zoom scope will go from 17 to 15, Stochastic Variable from 13 to 14, and then the Ikelos from 13 to 14, with the 7th Seraph and Every Waking Moment seeing the same change, and Huckleberry going from 13 to 15. They also say that they think adaptive submachine guns kill a little bit too quickly, and they're decreasing body damage from 12 to 11.25, but they're increasing the precision multiplier from 1.35 to 1.44. And they say for precision frame hand cannons, they're reducing the airborne effectiveness from a 75% airborne accuracy penalty to a plus 25 airborne effectiveness stat, and that's to help it sit with the other stat changes they're making. And now we get onto some heavy weapon changes. For machine guns, they're increasing the damage by 40% against PvE enemies and 20% against bosses. So that's another pretty strong buff there, and they say that Xenophage and Grand Overture will also get the buff, with the exception for the bonus versus bosses. They say they're fixing several inconsistencies in the stat displays between different swords, and they're also increasing the charge rate of Solar Scar from 20 to 50 to match Temptation's Hook. And they also say that they're making rocket launcher subfamily differentiation more extreme, so precision launchers will see minus 10% damage, and that's on both impact and detonation. High impact will see no changes, but adaptive and aggressive will see plus 10% damage. So that'll be interesting. And here they speak about exotics, and initially they say Fighting Lion needs a bit more of a buff, so they reverted the Season 15 Breach Grenade Launcher blast radius reduction just for the Fighting Lion, and that increases the blast radius by 0.4 meters, and they're increasing its damage by 5%. For Eyes of Tomorrow, they're increasing the damage versus bosses and champions by 30%. That'll be pretty cool to play around with. And for Leviathan's Breath, they say the Archer's Tempo perk from the Catalyst now has increased effect. And they've added a small delay before detonation on champions, mini-bosses, and bosses, and this allows the impact to stun an unstoppable champion and the detonation to deal bonus damage against it. And they also say the damage has been changed to be more of an even split between impact and detonation. Plus, they've increased damage across the board by 50%. So overall damage versus champions is roughly doubled. That should be pretty good. But for Huckleberry, they're increasing the zoom stat from 13 to 15. And then for Xenophage, they're increasing the rate of fire and adjusting the damage back to what it was previously. So the rate of fire goes from 100 RPM to 120 RPM, and they've reduced the damage per bullet to match the previous patch. And it doesn't benefit from the Season 17 machine gun damage versus bosses. Next though, they say Le Monarch is too oppressive, so they're reducing the poison tick damage versus players by 25%. They've also changed the poison damage type from burn to poison, which I say is largely housekeeping and not gameplay significant. They're also increasing the poison tick damage versus AI by 50%. And then they say for Lorentz Driver, it can be difficult to fight against in PvP, and they're reducing body shot damage against players by 20%. Also, body damage will revert to old behavior when in the weapons damage mode, and precision damage in any mode is unchanged. There are a few buffs to Skyburner's Oath, so they've increased the ADS projectile speed to make it hit scan, plus both ADS and hipfire are now 150 RPM, and they swapped the hipfire projectile to no longer track but to arc, similar to a grenade launcher. Plus, the hipfire detonation will apply burn to targets, and the bonus range from the Masterwork has been rolled into base stats of the weapon, and the Masterwork now grants bonus reload speed instead. And it will have the highest airborne effectiveness stat of any weapon in the game at 35, so that's interesting. Also interesting that it'll apply burn to targets. Could potentially go alongside his solar rework there. And they say the last word plays very differently on mouse and keyboard than it does on controller, but the disparity doesn't need to be that large. So they're keeping an eye on it, but they've reduced mouse and keyboard recoil penalty from 33 to 22%. That's an interesting one. For Arbalest, they're reducing damage versus champions by 25%, but it will still break barriers in one hit, so Arbalest gets knocked back a little bit right there. They say that Graviton Lance's Catalyst didn't help the weapon enough, and the Catalyst has been changed from granting Hidden Hand to granting Vorpal Weapon and Turnabout. That's actually a pretty cool change. But for Grand Overture, they've reduced the time between bursts when in missile mode, and holding the trigger will now fire all missiles in a continuous burst. Tapping will fire 5-round bursts. And we have even more exotic changes here. For Cold Heart, sustained damage will create an ionic trace, and collecting it will grant energy to all of your abilities. They're also increasing the grace time before the damage ramp clears from 0.113 to 1 second. For Prometheus Lens, sustained damage will apply a more useful burn to targets. Then for Wave Splitter, they say Void Damage type update, and power cycling mechanic was interesting but ultimately hard to capitalize on. So power level no longer cycles randomly, the default damage output is the same as the old middle tier. Picking up an Orb of Power will now grant 10 seconds of maximum power and cap at 20 seconds, and it will also now suppress targets while granting this mode to picking up an orb. For Osteostriga though, they've corrected the rotation on the projectile model, plus they're bringing Lord of Wolves in line, and they've reduced damage fall off start and end by 25%. So an absolute ton of exotic changes there, and be sure to give us your thoughts below. And for the perk changes for Snapshot, they've increased the ADS animation speed scaler from 0.5 to 0.75 for special ammo weapons, but they say primary ammo weapons are unchanged. They also say they want opening shot to feel less mandatory, so they've removed damage fall off scalers, and they've increased range stat bonuses from +20 to +25, but other stats from the perk are unchanged. And they also don't want full choke to necessarily be the go-to magazine perk forever, so they've increased the spread angle scale from 0.95 to 0.9625, which narrows the spread a little bit less and might make some of the other options more appealing. And they are going to buff smoothbore at the same time, so they've reduced the spread angle scale from 1.1 to 1.075, which widens the spread a little bit less. They also say Desperado is a strong perk in its current form, but they want to be able to put it on more weapons without breaking PvP, plus give it more PvE utility, so they've increased the fire recovery scaler from 0.415 to 0.7, so it doesn't fire as fast with the perk active. They've reduced the duration from 7 to 6 seconds and added a timer, and they've removed all PvE damage penalties. So it's going to be less strong in PvP, but perhaps more appealing for PvE. And they've rebuilt the Air Assault perk, so it now grants up to +60 airborne effectiveness stat when wounded. That's an interesting change. And they're making changes to Mulligan, so they're increasing the chance to return ammo on a miss from 20 to 35% on primary ammo weapons, but it will be unchanged on special and heavy ammo weapons. Then for Compulsive Reloader, they've increased the reload stat buff from +40 to 50, and Adagio was allowing for one-hit body kills with slug shotguns, so they've reduced the damage bonus for shotguns from 30 to 20%. And finally right here, absolutely massive TWAB, but they point out that leaving the loopholes at the beginning of Season 17 include for the Iron Banner, the occluded Finality Sniper Rifle, and the Finite Impactor Hand Cannon, for Nightfalls, the Comedian Shotgun, and the Palindrome Hand Cannon, and for Trials, Sheora's Wrath, and the Messenger. So those are going to be going away at the beginning of next season, but also they point out that leaving at the start of Season 18, for the Iron Banner will be the Peace Bond and the Archon's Thunder. For Nightfalls will be Plug 1 and the Hothead, and for Trials it will be Eye of Soul and the Summoner, but they say these are subject to change. And of course they will be rotating weapons back in and introducing new ones in their places, hopefully. So be sure to give us your thoughts about that down below, guys. A hell of a lot of sandbox changes, and I do think it's kind of a mixed bag. So as always, give us your thoughts down in the comment section. The final mention for the video today, though, would be that we do have a new Prime Gaming drop for Destiny 2 this month. And so if you signed up for Prime Gaming via Amazon Prime, they do these monthly kind of gear drops in the game. And the cosmetic items this month include the Tip of the Spear exotic Sparrow, then there is the Tall Tail exotic ship, which is a pretty cool one, but additionally the Drop Pod exotic Ghost Shell, and finally the Taunt Dance legendary emote. And so if you signed up for that, the drop is available, or if you want more information, you can check that out in the Prime Gaming rewards, which is linked below. But for today, guys, that's everything we have to round up in the video. Final message from one of my sponsors right here, but we've been working with Now Drinks for many years, and they make some pretty awesome drinks, which help to improve focus and memory when you're playing games, but instead of being filled with sugar and caffeine, are made with natural ingredients. I definitely recommend that you check them out. Plus you can get discounts, free shakers and things like that when you use code Houndish in the store. So if that sounds cool, be sure to check it out and the link is in the description. But otherwise, if you've enjoyed the video, a rating below really does help us out. Give us any thoughts you have on the stuff in the TWAB this week in the comments section. And finally, be sure to get subscribed if you want to see more Destiny content. Plus you can turn on the notification bell if you don't want to miss out on anything. But otherwise for today, thanks for tuning in and I'll catch you guys very soon.